by voice only, I guess. So good morning to everybody, and if you would, Beth, call the roll, and we'll see who else appears. Thanks.
Trustee Cates,
Here.
Trustee Riley,
Here.
Trustee McMahon,
Here.
Trustee Mishu,
Here.
Okay, and we'll wait
Beth,
for the.
I'm
Oh,
here.
Trustee Kane is here.
Oh, Trustee Kane.
I've been here. I got here 60 seconds ago, right on time.
And Pat's here also.
That's also, yeah.
Trustee Flood.
Oh, good. Okay, so we do have a
Yep,
full house and a quorum.
I'm also here, Beth. So Owen's here.
Trustee McCarthy. Excellent.
Yes.
Well, good morning to you, and good morning to all, and thanks for being here for this important meeting. We got as always, a busy agenda. This is, among other things, our work session on the 26 budget. And Ryan is going to lead us through that work session and also a discussion of the reserves and reserve policies and where we're headed with those. So why don't we kick it off with tab 1, reserves and reserve policy, also the system budget and enrollment data. So whatever order you'd like to go into directed, Ryan, please go ahead.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. Thought I would preview a little bit about the agenda and a little bit about kind of the order thinking about today. I'll start with where we are in the budget process. So as I say often, this is a really long process, and we're actually really just involved in the last piece. And so the campuses did all of their great work, and that led up to early March. They submitted their budgets. We had a full day of budget hearings on March the 19th. If anyone's out there and hasn't had a chance to look at those are all on YouTube. All accessible. You can take advantage of AI tools and get to the campus of your choice, ask questions. All of that information is out there. So if you didn't get a chance, strongly encourage you to go back and look at some really great presentations. So today is a work session. We will be reporting back on a variety of topics that folks specifically asked about, but we also have time later in the agenda for just a traditional Q&A if there are other pieces that you've thought about since our last meeting or things that come up today and you have questions. We've got a block of time set up for that. We'll be back 2 weeks from today and at our traditional monthly FFT meeting. That one will be a combination of the budget. That'll be the very first item on the agenda, and then a traditional agenda. So past practice, always subject to change, but past practice, depending on how this goes, is that we would present that budget to the committee on the 30th. I would present it in all of its detail. And then we'd be looking for what would hopefully be a favorable committee vote, and then moving to the full board at your May 19th meeting in Presque Isle. Now, we've made changes to that schedule before based on crazy things going on in Washington and crazy things going on in the world. So we're not locked in if things are changing so much that it doesn't make sense to move forward. But at least where we stand today, I think that's the plan, and that's where we're headed. So I'm going to jump right into tab 1 if there's no questions about that. And thought I would spend just a couple of minutes on terminology because we're gonna go into this section about reserves, and I want to be super clear kind of what we're talking about, because we have 2 conversations in different parts of the agenda today lined up around reserves, and it can be a complicated topic. It straddles that my feared zone between budgeting and accounting, so the terminology doesn't always cross perfectly, and so I want to make sure we're clear on what it is and what we're talking about. So the first one, our kind of first shot at reserves, really going to focus on, these are the slides that you have in your presentation, really going to focus on reserves in the context of what's available to balance a budget. What is around to make a critical investment at a strategic point in time if you've got those resources. And that is substantially different from the larger accounting definition, and we start talking about unrestricted net position, and we start talking about all of these various other reserves and things like capital reserves and risk management reserves, funds functioning as endowment. Somebody gives you money for to pay for a part of an endowment, but it's not large enough to set up on its own, so it sits in a reserve account. Those are under the accounting definition, and when we start talking about the accounting side of things, those will pop up. But while they're available in theory, if we were at a liquidation stage, fortunately, we're not there. So funds that we have set aside for a specific capital project that you have approved, it doesn't make sense to present them in the same context of here's a picture of reserves that a campus has available to balance their budget. So we're going to make those, or I'm going to make those two distinctions in the presentation today. You're going to see it in the slides, but we'll be super clear about which bucket we're in, and can always dive deep into the weeds of those topics if anyone has that interest. So again, what you're going to see, I'm going to focus on I'm going to focus on two buckets. I'm going to focus for the system and for the campuses. I'm largely going to focus on E&G and auxiliary. And so all of those other categories, which we'll talk about when we talk about the reserve policy and the administrative practice letter, for now, for these slides that you're going to see, I'm just going to drop them all in another bucket. So you're going to see, here's a snapshot of reserves at the University of Maine at Augusta, for instance, and here's what E&G looks like, and here's what auxiliary looks like, and here's this other bucket. And those other buckets will vary depending on what the campus is and what the individual circumstances are. And again, we can get into those details later or at a different meeting, but I tried, again, to keep that focus right on budget. In the second part, again, I'll wade into that accounting side, and we'll go into the weeds there. So last caution before I jump into the slides that I wanted to mention. It's not so much a caution as just a kind of an opening piece. This is, we've been using in the finance space and in the administrative space across the system, using AI where we can, where it makes sense, not just for the sake of using it, but if there are opportunities where we can use it to present data, to provide insight that we previously didn't have available, where we can use tools to identify trends and uncover insights and really just help us make better data-driven decisions, then we're going to do that, and we're going to take advantage of the tool, and we're going to build in all of the verification steps we use, and the buzzword is human in the loop. And so you use the skill set that we have, a lot of the people on this screen, and you leverage that with AI to kind of pull out additional insights. And you're going to see that. I've been waiting to figure out when we're going to roll that out in full blown, and so this is it. And so you're going to.
Hey, Ryan, this is actually you talking, though, right?
This
is really you. This is not like AI. You seem like you. There's no weird blips. I just want to make sure we're getting you. Okay.
Absolutely true. I can't.
Because that's important.
I can't confirm that I'm in Maine, but it's definitely. Yeah. So let's jump into the presentation and start talking specifics. So hopefully you're seeing the regular screen and not the presentation mode. Is that correct?
Yep.
Okay, perfect. So again, we have this larger unrestricted net position bucket, and kind of I wanted to acknowledge these buckets again just before I jumped into the specifics in the campus. So these terms you're all going to see when we move back to the reserve policy and the administrative practice letter. But this gives you an idea of the buckets that we have out there now. So if you look over on the system side, we've got what we think of as the Budget Stabilization Fund, similar to what exists in state government. That's that reserve fund that is really only available for a budget crisis, a temporary investment to buy time, or a strategic investment. The idea is not that it is the equivalent of your checking account that we go into for a regular basis when we have an idea that we want to invest in. If we do have an idea like that, that's the second bucket, the Unified Operating Reserve. You're going to hear me talk a little bit more about that when we get into reserve policy. Lots of conversations with this committee, with the board as part of the strategic plan about, this idea of having a sandbox, an opportunity, a fund where you could make strategic investments when those come along. That is what this bucket is, and you'll see that further defined in the policy a little bit later. And then we have other buckets: benefit pool, carryover, risk management reserves. Again, that's in that kind of other category. I said that, they exist out there. Could we literally use them to balance a budget? We could, but would it be wise? Absolutely not. Those reserves are there for a very specific purpose. And that's how we categorize those. On the campus side, again, as I mentioned, largely an operating reserve, which these could be auxiliary or E&G buckets, some capital planning reserves, and then some various special and strategic investment reserves. What you're going to see in the language a little bit later is what we've tried to do is we tried to collapse some of these. If you look at some of these, if you take a peek under the hood, some institutions, in some cases, we just have too many of these reserve accounts. And so, we have cases where, a campus has a negative reserve account up here, and then little small ones that are positives that give you the impression that you've got resources. It's like overspending your savings account and then using your checking account that doesn't have any resources in it. So we're trying to clean those up, consolidate those where they make sense. So now let me get into the specific ask. So the question or the inquiry we had in March was, what's the status of reserves both at the system and at the campus level? And that's the picture that you see here. Again, largely focused on this blue line, which is the operating reserve, and this green line down at the bottom, which is the budget stabilization fund, and then you see the other line. Again, the other is a variety of categories. They bounce up and down for a variety of different reasons, some that make sense, some that don't. But all of this is to say everything is about context. And so we're going to present this information to you. We're going to show you the trends. We're going to show you when somebody is first, that means that somebody's going to be last. And we're going to pull out that kind of information, and we're not going to try to put the best spin on everything. And so this is a good example right here. So if you look at that operating reserve number there and you compare it, over history, it's been fairly stable, but you see this huge decrease last year, this $16 million increase. And so you're probably thinking, well, I don't remember dropping $16 million in the operating reserve. What happened there? And again, this goes to this whole idea of we'll leverage AI, but we'll also use the humans. We'll use the human in the loop to provide context. And the context in this particular case is, we had a strong investment year last year, and you'll recall that at the end of the year, the chancellor came to you with a kind of multifaceted plan. Some of it was key investments that we thought made sense across the system, and so some of these artificial intelligence demos, the significant investment in YourPace, some of those kind of fundraising, both small campus and larger, kind of fell into that $5 million bucket. Part of that same plan that the chancellor presented you was a $5 million transfer to the budget stabilization fund, and that's the green blip that you see right there. And then there were other things that happened throughout the year, and so there were a couple of legal settlements that came out of that fund that we've talked about previously in other meetings. There was an investment, a planned investment in repaving Main Street. And so what happened is all of those investments were approved after July 1st. So instead of getting to the end of the year, we've got some investment money and we immediately put it into these buckets. Because the trustees hadn't approved that investment plan yet, on July 1st. We put it in the operating fund, and then later we moved it out. So that line should have been substantially less steep, but that's the context behind that. We put money in, and then we immediately kind of pulled it back out and distributed it, and so that's what makes up for that large decrease that you see right there. Couple of other trend things that you can see this information as well as I can, but in the budget stabilization fund, again, you see FY21. You see the flashing up on my screen. That was really strong in investment income, helped us out. And then we had a really bad investment income year, and you see us drop from that high of what was around 21 million at the time, way down in the next year. So investment income is great when it's up, and when it's not, it's not so great. And that's what's reflected right there. So I'll move from here into the individual campus slides. My goal was not to spend a lot of time on them, because again, what we tried to do was present largely the same information across each of the campuses in the same kind of picture. And so you can see each of these campuses as we through. Let me see, I'm having trouble advancing. There we go. Again, I'll just touch briefly on some of these. So again, this one is University of Maine at Augusta. I'll note one of the trends that you'll see in all of these is, particularly at our smaller campuses, we really struggle on the auxiliary side, specifically since COVID. We've had challenges there, and you can see that in several of the campuses as we move forward. For UMA, I'd certainly want to note their E&G fund balance up over 9 million, the strongest in the system, not just as a percentage of budget, but almost in raw terms. And you can see it's consistently been at that level going back for the last 10 years, with some just modest fluctuations in there. Auxiliary has gone down a little bit over the last few years as the campus has made some substantial investments in housing and the auxiliary side of things, and those typically require initial investments of reserves, and then you hope to recover that. And I think you can see that starting from 23 into 24 at UMA in this example. University of Maine, again, this is another one where context is important. So you'll recall, the president and the CBO came to you with a multi-year strategy to address, long-term, some long-term and some structural budget issues that needed to be addressed. And in a perfect world, this is why reserves are around, so that you have an opportunity to kind of phase into those changes. It's exactly the opposite of what I'm going to say in a couple of slides when we talk about Farmington, and I'll just combine the conversation is, the Farmington example is you don't have that kind of runway, and so you struggle, and so you put together a combination of some support from the system, and maybe we've got some COVID funds, and then you just keep digging the hole just a little bit deeper, and that's the difference here. This one was a planned investment, and I certainly know that the president and the CBO are committed to replenishing those, but it gives you that kind of breathing room while you move into change. And you'll recall UMA did something similar a few years ago. So this is the Farmington picture. Again, I'm a strong believer in all of the work that the president is doing. I can see those changes. I see them regularly in the enrollment reports that come out of Jeff's office for this year. But this picture is exactly what I was just talking about. This is an institution that needed to make some change and had no runway whatsoever. This is why reserves are critical. This is why they're important. And so, again, what you see here is exactly what I talked about. Is from FY15 through last year, no budgets balanced. Every budget required some form of reserves, whether it was system reserves or COVID, or reserves, quite frankly, that didn't exist at the campus level. And again, it's why we think they're so important. There's not a lot positive on this chart. I'm not going to pretend there is. The auxiliary deficit is stabilized. I think that's the positive here. But I feel good about the things going on the ground, and I'm hopeful in the long term, when you see this slide 10 years from now, it'll look substantially different. University of Maine at Fort Kent. Again, this is the perfect example of that E&G and auxiliary challenge that we have, and particularly true at the auxiliary at some of our smaller campuses. So some challenges here. They are long term. They didn't just happen in COVID. We've had some consistent deficits in auxiliary. But what Fort Kent really does well is they balance their budget regardless of what those circumstances are. So if they're experiencing a deficit on the auxiliary side, I feel really confident in 10 plus years of working with Pam and the team at Fort Kent that I know the auxiliary side is gonna offset, or excuse me, the E&G side will offset that. You can see that here. Ideally, we'd like these lines to be, we'd like them to be closer. We'd like them both to be on the positive side of zero, but at least as an overall, this is balanced. Last two that I'll mention. So University of Maine at Presque Isle. I guess what I'd say about this one is come back and see me when I do this one next year. The campus, I think we know the growth that is going on at Fort Kent, and I think what the president has done really well, what Betsy's doing really well, I think what Megan is going to continue to do really well is planning, and not just throwing money at everything when you have an opportunity to make investments. I've been here for 15 years. The opportunity when campuses make investments is not a lot. And so when you do it, you need to be strategic. And I appreciate that the campus is doing that. In all of their conversations, they talk about setting aside reserves. Since when I show you this next year, or if I showed you an updated version of this now, that auxiliary gap has been wiped out. And so they've been working with us on making strategic adjustments to their reserve position, as well as planning for the future. So I want to acknowledge that really strong work. And I think you're going to see a dramatically different picture when we look at this one, not just next year, but rolling forward as well. And then I'll wrap up with University of Southern Maine. In general, if I could lop off the last third of that chart, this is a good picture, kind of long term, with some ups and downs as you make investments. The challenge at USM, to the extent there's a positive in it, it's an isolated, very narrow window from closing out FY22 into FY23. It was pre this president and pre this CBO, but they came in, inherited a budget that was challenged, weren't able to get to balance by the end of that year, but have really shown kind of strong budget performance in FY24. I know in FY25, and I thought they presented a strong budget to you in March. So again, really confident in the leadership that we have at USM. And I think this is it's a blip. It's a painful blip. But I think long term, we're trending in a positive direction right there. That's the reserve part of the conversation. And so before I go into Mr. Chair, after this, I was going to go to the other two pieces of the system budget. And then I would come back to the reserve language at the end, since it's not as specifically related to the budget. But maybe before I go on to the next topic, I'll pause there and see if there are any questions about those reserve numbers or any of that.
Thanks, Ryan. Questions from anybody about what we've heard so far? And I can't see everybody. So if I don't see your hand, raise your hand, please. But if I don't see it, just speak up. Ryan, I've got one. I should know the answer to this question, but to the extent that there is a negative reserve number in any of these campuses for either auxiliary or E&G, is that money that is actually owed back to the system?
It is. I mean, we can manage it on a year-to-year basis because we're a really large organization with lots of kind of pieces. And so if somebody is up 1.5 and somebody else is down 1, that's not ideal. That's not what we want. But we can move on and we can figure out how to go from there.
Thanks. Other questions?
Roger, I'm not sure you can see my hand. But
Oh, I can't, Emily. Please go ahead.
you got it. Thank you.
Yep.
So Ryan, financially things are a little topsy-turvy right now. You referenced several times in your slides, so check back with me next year or let me see in 6 months. I think I'm more worried about 6 weeks, right, from now. Can you just talk about, obviously, none of us have a crystal ball, but can you just talk about how you are sort of thinking about the management of this environment and how that impacts our reserve picture as we look at hopefully landing the plane on this budget sooner rather than later? Just how you're thinking about how the topsy-turviness of all of it interacts with what we just saw.
Yeah. So ironically, I'm thinking about it like I was thinking about it, how long ago was that? 15 years ago, 10 years ago?
Yeah, me too. That's kind of what I was thinking. Like,
when
I
a
was
lot
there
of-
with you and I was like, I'm pretty sure I know exactly what he's thinking, but I
Yeah.
just wanted to check that. Maybe explain for the crowd.
Yeah. So, I mean, again, I look around a lot of familiar faces that were there in 2008. But that's what it feels like. I could give you the best assessment of where we are right now. And then to your point, I don't even know if it's 6 weeks from now, it's like 6 hours from now, that it might be a completely different situation. And for us, it's a lot of challenges. It's obviously the challenges in Washington and that we talk about, but there are just as significant, if not more significant, challenges going on right now in Augusta with our budget there. So there's a lot of things. There's a lot of things at play. There always are. But it seems like a little bit more than normal. We almost always pass our budget before the state does, and then we kind of adjust along the way. But we've generally got a pretty good idea of where the budget's going to end up. I struggle to see where it's going to end up right now, or at least with any kind of clarity.
I just will just say as a follow-up, thank you, Ryan. That makes total sense to me. And maybe the request is to Roger, when we meet again in a couple weeks, we can just deliberately put some piece of that on our agenda.
Sure. Thanks, Emily. And I think we'll have an opportunity for strategic reasons to discuss this further in executive session at the end of today's meeting as well. So that's good. Ryan, I know you're going to get to the individual reserves later, but just for overall financial picture at the present time, our rainy day fund, the budget stabilization fund, if you will, where do we stand so far this fiscal year with the return or lack thereof on that account?
Yeah, so I think you're referencing temporary investment income.
Yep.
I regularly report to the board on. Tracy's going to help me out here because we just checked into this week. I think largely I don't have the exact number in front of me. I think largely we've wiped out all of the gains that we had this year. I think maybe Tracy has a more specific number, but overall, I'd expect it when I report to you next. I'll be wiping out almost everything that I've said to you positively over the course of the last 8 months.
I would just add that, yesterday our staff pulled some numbers for this meeting, and we're showing investment income earned through the end of March preliminarily at 9.8 million. After budget throughout the year, that would leave a net of 7. But having said that, as you know, March and April have been difficult for the operating fund. It's less aggressive, so that's a negative 0.4 for March on a return basis, and a negative 1.2 for April to date through last Friday. The managed investment pool and the pension were a little bit worse than that, but I'm hopeful. But you know what? Every day is every moment. It's different in the market, so no promises there. But I think we are holding on to some of our investment return, at least in the operating fund.
So on the budget stabilization fund, are we, given March and April so far, are we in negative territory for the fiscal year?
No,
we're still positive. Yep.
Okay, good.
And then
Thanks.
just as a reminder, we process wise, we get to the end, we see where that temporary investment is, and then we come to you with a plan. Hopefully, if it's positive, that could potentially say, hey, here's where we think you should invest, or we should put all this in budget stabilization or some combination thereof.
Right. Okay.
Mr. Chair, I don't think you
Thanks.
can see, but the chair has her hand up as well.
Oh, I'm sorry, Trish, please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. Just to trigger off Emily's concerns about the budget, we're going to need some kind of context as we think about this, budget in April, as you know. But little thing, throughout the discussion of reserves, you always talk about the goals that we have for reserves. For the next meeting, it might be useful to see how close we are.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll actually be talking about the goals a little bit more when we get in the
Okay.
agenda, because no doubt you've seen those in the,
Yep.
in the reserve policy. Yep.
Okay, other questions, and please feel free to speak up. A bunch of your pictures are cut off at the top where the hand is, so I can't see them. Any other questions at this point? Seeing none, thank you, Ryan, for that. Why don't you move ahead?
Yep, excellent. I think to the chair's point on that last piece, what we'll do is, when we present you the core financial ratios, for instance, every year
Yep.
we include the benchmark right on there. So I think we'll do the same because
Okay,
the benchmark
good.
will be different for each campus, and so we can make a note to do that going forward. That's a good suggestion. Okay, so I am going to transition now over to a different bucket. We're going to talk a little bit, got two more in this space before we get to reserve. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about, how am I doing time-wise? Okay, we got it on there. I'm going to talk a little bit about the system office and some of its buckets. And then we're going to get down to a student on campus and not on campus exercise next. So let me share my screen here. Okay. So again, as a reminder, system office, what we think of as the system office is really kind of three different buckets here. It's university services allocated, which is really code for what you think of as shared services. So shared IT services and HR and finance and all of those kind of buckets. Is what's in the green. Governance is exactly what it sounds like. It's the chancellor's office. It's senior executives. It's myself. It's that team. And then university services unallocated, and I'll go through all these buckets in detail. Is investment. Strategic investments that the system and the board have made over a number of years. Some of them are investments that we made last year, but some of them are investments that go back to previous boards and previous chancellors. And we've just made the decision that investment made sense. And so it's a continuation of that on an annual basis, not that they can't always be revisited. In fact, they usually are. Okay. So I'm going to start with university services allocated or the shared service side of the budget, and happy to take any questions along the way. Overall, this is, as you can see, 367 total positions. We were 388 when I reported to you last year, so down about 21 positions from last year. Most of those positions, they're a little bit all over the place, but certainly the bulk of them occurred in IT. We talked to you in previous meetings about some of the structural changes that we made in IT, putting more people on the ground, more people doing work. Robert spent some time sharing that with you in the past, and that's the largest reduction that you see there. You do see when you look at the rainbow wheel there, the organization of shared services, and no surprise, IT is that biggest piece, followed by HR and finance. When we talk about shared services, we get a lot of questions about how we allocate out shared services, and so it's a little bit different depending on what the category of shared service that we're talking about. So again, you can see the examples here. HR. just makes sense to charge by the number of employees, since that's the universe that we're providing services to. For facilities chargebacks, the percentage of square foot out on campuses made sense. Same with procurement and so on. And you can generally kind of figure out the logic of, what's the universe that you're serving. Is it something where FTE makes sense, or does it make more sense to include headcount, for instance? And so this is how those individual charges, the individual components inside shared services work. It can also mean that rates can be flat across the system, and somebody could have the shared service charge that's going up because maybe they got more square footage than they had last year, or they're procuring more services relative to other campuses. But on par, you can generally see how these are allocated out. We also further delineate kind of shared services by what we refer to as unified services and then campus services. And so you can see in the roughly $56 million budget how that is broken out. Unified services are those services, again, that we provide that support all campuses. And so Tracy's office, the controller's office, is a really good example here. We don't allocate that out individually to each of the campuses. It just makes sense at the global level. Campus services is a little more specific. And so think about the example I'll use here is the UMA campus CBO and Eiley and her staff. Those are also part of that shared service budget, but those charges go directly back to UMA. So if Eiley independently decides with the president that they really need one more HR person on staff, or they really need one more finance person because they've got something planned, or the opposite, we could really get by with one less person this year, then they have that opportunity. They control that piece of campus services within the normal approval process. So this is university services allocated. Again, let me look around for my notes. And it's okay. Here we go. So this is university services allocated. I don't know that I'll go through each individual line, but happy to answer any questions. Say a couple of kind of overarching things and then work my way through these. Couple of challenges, and again, the challenges are not unique. I don't want to pretend that they're unique to shared services. They were unique. They were unique to the extent they were not unique to all of our campuses. One unique one was we held shared services rates flat last year. We didn't necessarily have the revenue to support that, but we made that strategic decision, and so we needed to absorb a second and third year, if you will, of wage increases, or a second year. So had challenges on the personnel side. We're obviously a people heavy organization, and so needed to absorb those. Quite frankly, the bigger challenge we're having in the university services allocated side, to the extent your goal is to keep the budget flat, which is what we try to do, is just the software and hardware side of IT. Those contracts almost always come with regular escalators in them. And the more things that we are doing as a system, and that's a good thing, the more unique software solutions that we come up with, all with additional costs and then new licensing costs. And so there are pretty substantial increases that we're seeing in here on the IT side that we're trying to manage. I'll note, Robert, CIO, is going to work with, we've already started conversations with the chief business officers. We're going to expand that group out. We want to have conversations about software. Feels like we always add it, but we never take it away. And so that's the kind of conversation we want to have, because we made a decision to invest in a piece of software 6 years ago. Does it still make sense today? If it does, that's great, and we want to pay for that. That's fabulous. If not, let's have that conversation and see if we can find some efficiencies. And so we've set up a structure to do that. On governance, governance is 25 positions. It is historically kind of gone from somewhere in the 20 range up to 28 or 29 positions. I think I've presented in the past. This year it is down one from last year. That is a net number. I think there were a couple out and maybe one in. But overall, stable staffing that you see on the governance side of things. Again, same kind of pressures. We did bump up attrition as a way to try to absorb some of those increases. We eliminated the position that I referenced earlier. You can see the increase there, about a little over 3% for that. So I'm going to go to the last bucket, and then then we'll pause and take additional questions. So as a reminder, one of the decisions that the trustees made back in 2016 was when we received new state appropriation, and unfortunately, it's not an every year occurrence, but when we do, that some percentage should come off the top of that to support system-wide initiatives. What the trustees were finding, almost a decade ago, was we'd allocate all the dollars, and then when we started talking about what we could do collaboratively, there were no resources for that. And so when we wanted to make research, we wanted to enhance research on some of the smaller campuses, we just didn't, quite frankly, have the resources for that sitting at the system office. And so we made decisions along the way to create things like the Research Reinvestment Fund to provide additional resources so that the University of Maine could bring on staff that would provide research support to some of the smaller campuses and a number of forgot to move the slide forward on a number of those kind of areas. And so that is what you see on this slide, which it looks like a random collection of investments, and in some ways it is when you step back after 8 years of doing this. But they were all individually kind of a long conversation and a long kind of pro and con. We don't always have money to invest, so each one of these was its own difficult decision, but all at different points in time. So let me talk about some of them. Up at the top are ones that come from the legislature. They are laser targeted, and they need to be spent on those topics. So I unlike the ones at the bottom, they don't have as much flexibility. The money that we get for adult degree completion, for instance, we need to spend on adult degree completion. So that's a slightly different bucket. What you see at the bottom is strategic appropriation, and this is really the category that I was talking about. So let me just hit on a few of them. Second one down, libraries. Again, this is the perfect example. Since we started talking about, universities working together, 15 years ago, the example that everyone immediately comes to is the libraries. Why is it that when I go down to Orono, I don't have access to this? Or why does this campus have access to this tool and I don't? So we always identified it as an opportunity, going back to Vice Chancellor Neely and his work, but just quite frankly didn't have the resources. We don't always have seven figures. And so thanks to some really great work that Vice Chancellor St. John did, and the great work of our really excellent librarians all across the system, we came to you a couple of years ago with this plan to phase in investments in our libraries to make resources available more across the system. And if anyone has any questions on that, I'm going to defer them all to Jeff. But let me move on before questions. IR is another area. Again, so this one is an investment we've been making for a long time, but we didn't have institutional research team at the system office. And we, thanks to the generosity of the University of Maine, we relied on a lot of their expertise for a number of years, and eventually made the decision that that we needed to make an investment there. And so we brought on originally Justin and Bob, and you see their great work regularly in Jeff's enrollment reports. And so that was another investment that we made. And then we need to keep updating that investment. So I suspect at one time, that number might have been a $500,000 investment, and then there were increases, and so you see those reflected here. I'm just going to hit a couple of more. I'll hit the main center because it's going to be up on the agenda here shortly. And we do make, that's largely an Alfond grant recipient, and we'll talk about some of those details a little bit later. But we do also provide $2 million in E&G support. We made the decision a few years ago to provide about $400,000 in support for the CEO position there. And then just last year, I came to you with a plan to move 1.6 million of expenses or to cover 1.6 million of expenses for the buildings at 300 4th Street and at 7 Custom House to consolidate those into a single budget. And thankfully, and I appreciate it, you approved that measure. And so that's the 2 million that's in that bucket. And the last one that I'll mention, but I'm happy to talk about any of them. I'll mention the marketing one again, because that's a conversation we've had recently. That was an investment again, just maybe 3 years ago. The chancellor came to you with a plan to invest in marketing as part of one of those kind of end of year, or excuse me, as part of one of those off the top appropriation pieces. That was one of those. You approved that, and now you see that in here. And I actually will mention one more because it is the only new one in here, and that is the Shared Services Law School. And so I do need to explain this one a little bit more. So we've gone to this. We've had this shared service model in place now for about 15 years, and we've gotten really good at it. And thanks to Miriam and the team, we've got a really good model for chargebacks and all of that. And but what we didn't plan, because it wasn't the reality at the beginning of this, is that there's a lot of shared services that USM was providing the law school when the two of them were together. And the chancellor and board made that strategic decision to separate them administratively, but USM, to their credit, continued providing those services, and quite frankly, it made sense not to recreate something from scratch when you've got that expertise just down the road. But also, it's appropriate that USM is compensated for that, since we're charging them for our shared services piece. So this is an issue that we've been trying to address for the last couple of budget cycles. Just the resources at the end of the day weren't in the law school budget. And so Chancellor and I spent a lot of time talking about this one, and ultimately made the decision that we would recommend to you that this made sense as a strategic investment. I think we'd come back and revisit the amount next year if it's not something that the law school can absorb. But we felt that it was important to make USM whole for the services that they're providing, and not kind of hold that for several more years while we figure out a funding source. And then the TBD column, I keep saying last one, but the TBD column is exactly what it sounds like. That's the percentage off the top associated with the FY26 appropriation currently in the governor's budget. We felt it made an incredible sense to keep it as TBD, so that we could adjust based on the circumstances. If that appropriation in all its glory materializes, then that will be a great conversation to have. But felt probably premature to have that conversation given the shifting grounds in Augusta. And so with that, I will finally stop giving you examples. Let me make sure that's my last. That's my last slide for that section. So again, why don't I stop and see if there are any questions on any of those pieces.
Thank you. Thanks, Ryan. Questions? I'll start off. Ryan, go back to that slide again, the unallocated. In the very last point you were making, the TBD. So that TBD, is that the essentially the 4% that we were hoping to get in additional funds? Or is that a portion of that 4% or what?
Right. It is mostly the percent. It's roughly 30% of the 4% increase.
Yeah.
Give or take. Again, there's some places where we needed to move some dollars to make the math work and so on. But in general, that's what that number reflects. So if we're flat funded, that whole number just completely disappears, and then some probably.
Right, and the practice has been that the other 70% is allocated to the campuses pursuant to whatever formula is in existence at the time. Is that right?
Correct.
Okay.
Can you say that one more time? You broke up right in the middle. I just want to make sure.
Sure, I'm sorry. The other 70% gets allocated to the campuses according to a formula which has been determined in the past. I'm not sure what the current one is, but that's what happens
exactly
to the other
right.
70%. Okay, yep.
Yep, and we're transitioning out of that. So next year you'll see a different you'll see a different allocation, but that's exactly right for now. Yep.
Yep. Okay. So all of the things that are not mandated, the $7 million at the top of that list is mandated by the legislature, if you will. How long what's the longest one of those has been in place? I'm just curious how much we've been looking at those. Yeah.
Yep. I'll say internally, we look at them a lot. I just had a conversation about several of these yesterday. The longest two that I know have been around for a while, I'll say, are the Research Reinvestment Fund. That was a Chancellor Page initiative. And the Demolition Fund has been around. That was a me initiative a long time ago. So those two have been around a while. Everything else is newer-ish, 5 years maybe and less.
Okay. And have those numbers stayed the same? In other words, if the library was approved at $1 million way back when, is that figure the same as it's been?
Most of them are. The library is an exception. The library was one where it was a big enough investment that we phased it in over a couple of years. I can't remember if we're at the top of what it is right now, but in general, that is the case. The Research Reinvestment Fund has always been 2.1 million. The Demolition Fund has always been 850,000.
Thanks. Good. Pat.
Yes, thank you. I know in the shared area, the allocated area, so many of those positions were information technology, Ryan. And I just wondered, are those positions largely at one location, or are they scattered equally around the campuses?
Yeah. I'm gonna punt on the last part about the specific allocation. I'll say that and get back to you. Hopefully Robert's listening. In general, they're going to be distributed all over the place. I don't know whether it's a 50-50 thing. We certainly have IT staff on all of our campuses. We have some that work remotely, and so it's a pretty good mix depending on what their specific kind of day-to-day job is. You can imagine if you're a help desk person, then you're naturally going to be on a campus versus someone else, that might be able to work from home, because that's a great, recruitment and retention tool for us. But I'll follow up and I can get you an exact breakdown.
Ryan, if I may, I would say yes, definitely the majority, if not all, of the IT positions were not located at the campuses. And any position eliminated that was not IT was definitely not located at the campuses. So for the bulk of it was really what we think of as those system shared services, not the campus services.
Thank you, Miriam. Other questions? Thanks, Pat. Ryan, I know we're all hoping we're going to get additional funding from the state this year, although that's still up in the air. If we do, what's the plan on distribution of that 70%? working from the same formula that would have been used in the last fiscal year at this point?
So if we're fortunate to get those resources, then the way I think that was 2.9 million, for instance, the way that incremental, is that the question, how that incremental piece would be
Yeah.
allocated?
Right.
Yep, that would be more than likely. I would come here with the chancellor with a recommendation. That's typically how we've done it in the past, and we present it to the committee, and just like we would any other items. Yeah.
Thanks. Other questions? I'm not seeing other hands. Are there any? If not, then thanks very much. Why don't you move ahead with the next chunk here?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I've got one more section, and I've got about 20 minutes. I wonder if we couldn't take a short break here. My computer does not have a power cord, and I'm getting like critical battery warning signs. So
Uh-oh.
if we could take a quick bathroom break, and I could fix my computer and then come right back.
Why don't we, 5 minutes enough, do you think?
Perfect.
10 o'clock, we'll reconvene. Sounds good. Okay, I think we're back. Ryan, you're all plugged in?
I am back, Mr. Chair.
Okay. Forward march.
Okay. Thank you to all the people in the office that scrambled to help me find a cord. So I'm going to move on to this last category. And so let me just pause for a second and offer all kinds of cautions. So one of the great things we've had about these meetings over the years is we get lots of requests during these meetings for information, and it's typically stuff that we've not put together. If we put it together, we wouldn't have had the question. And it's not unusual for something to come out of this meeting to then roll into our budget presentation for the next 10 years. And so I think the waterfall chart that you see that started at UMA was an example of that, where somebody asked for some details on credit hours and then it rolled forward. And so maybe this will be one of those examples, this next set of information. But like that one, it's always unique and it's always a challenge the first time we put it together, and I don't know that we get it exactly right. And we hear from campuses that you should have done it this way or that way, and we make it better. And so the first time is always a challenge. And so I'm going to acknowledge that when I show you this first set of charts. I'm going to acknowledge that the numbers may not be perfect, and I'll tell you why they are, but I do think it presents the picture, or I think the picture that the FFT chair was at least trying to paint with this request. So with that context, let me jump back into the presentation and get to the right spot. Okay, so let me introduce the idea, and then the chair can correct me if I mess it up. But the idea was that I think Roger was looking for was, if you started this universe of students, so this head count, and so you can see right here it's 26,154 students. How do those students then get broken up into 3 different buckets? Of that head count, what percentage is part-time versus full-time? And then of that head count, how many of them are taking classes in person versus remote or some other kind of option? And then, for those students that are taking classes, how many of them are taking classes on the campus versus off the campus? And so good information. The challenge, and this is my disclaimer that I promised to put right across the middle of the page, is that people don't always fit neatly into those buckets. And so everything needs to be taken with a grain of salt, although I think, again, it's going to give you good kind of trend, information. The perfect example is in the instruction mode piece. And so, what we needed to do here is we started with 26,154 for total system headcount, and every category is based on that number. And so you need to go into one bucket or the other. You need to be in bucket A or bucket B. So student Riley is taking our classes, and maybe they're taking 3 classes in person and 1 class online. Somebody else is 2 and 2. We need to put you in a bucket. And so we did that using the distance ed report. And, thanks to Nancy Pearson in our office for the great work that she did, to the CBOs and campuses that were super responsive to a last minute request that was a little out of the box of what we typically ask them. And because it was a little out of the box, we had a data error when we gave you all the information. So everything you have in front of you, just grab a match and blow it up. And after this is over, I'll give you a new version. And that's because in the first version that we ran, the version that you have in front of me, we had an error where UMA inadvertently included their early college students, for instance. And so when you looked at some of the UMA statistics, for instance, it didn't seem right, which is why we poked and worked with them and corrected that. And so that not only corrected the UMA slide, but then it's going to correct all of the other references to system numbers and stuff like that. And so I fixed as many as I could. You'll note the updated pieces, but I do think it presents, again, a really good picture. And then, maybe the build off from this is we know that we've got 16,000 students in this example taking classes in person, and 6,500 of them are online. What days are they taking classes in person, and how does that break out, and what can we do with that data? So lots of different ways to go. But this is the system numbers. Those are all the disclaimers. So again, you can see full-time, part-time, we're roughly 70-30. 64-36 in person versus remote, and then housing, you can see the 25-75. I'm going to ask the chair if he has something he wants to add here in a second, but just let me throw a couple cautions out there, a couple of things. Great. This is a great use of AI here. So again, help us to aggregate all of that information at the system level, to talk about trends over multiple years. And so you can see, what has happened to the percentage of in-person classes on a campus over the last 3 years, and how does that compare to other campuses? So really, really good information. But like all information, it's, numbers are great. And you can manipulate them however you want, and they can work against you and they can work for you. And so what's throwing off the numbers here in some cases is what I have routinely said over the course of the last year that throws off our numbers, and that's Ray and the good work at Presque Isle. So if you look at Presque Isle in isolation, for instance, it's going to look like the number of students that are a part of housing, for instance, is just falling off the floor, falling off the roof, that it was really, really high, and now it's just substantially less. Well, you can see the raw numbers that it's roughly the same. It's just the percentage changes because there's so many people in that remote number now, and in that off-campus number because of the growth of your pace. And then that's also going to obviously then change system-wide housing numbers. And so if I ran this housing status for the system last year, it's probably higher than 25% because we're bringing in so many more students online, and that's throwing off the numbers. And so that's the case with everything. It's always the case with numbers, but I just pointed out because it's good to point out. So let's talk about some of the individual campuses. And again, got about 7 minutes left, so I'm not going to spend a ton of time on these. Maybe a minute per slide. So again, this gives you that snapshot. So again, same kind of principle where you start in the top left with this is the UMA example with roughly 3,000 students. You can see the full-time, part-time breakdown. The instruction mode, again, if you look at your version versus this updated one, you'll see a substantial shift in there. That was the early college catch, and so you can see those numbers have been updated. And then you see, again, relatively small percentage of students, 4.5% in on-campus housing. But you look at the middle chart, and you can see that's experienced a substantial growth, doubled in just the last 3 years, 74% increase there. Top right, you can see the in-person attendance numbers. I thought these were fascinating across all of our campuses, and then some additional, kind of AI insights that are provided about those trends. And then at the bottom, what you see is the position within the system across various categories. And so really good information if you take it all in, all of the campuses, seeing where folks are, understanding what those trends are. And again, we did that for each of the campuses. So I'm just going to quickly flow through these. I'll say what the interesting thing was that I found is, I used Anthropic model called Claude to do most of this analysis, and use it regularly for dashboards. And it analyzed all of the information that it put in, and then produced a profile of each of the institutions completely independent on its own, but remarkably categorized all of the institutions almost exactly like we would in a conversation. So it quickly realized by looking at the enrollment information, the percentage of students on campus, it's seen program plan information because I upload that from when Jeff and Bob provide that to me. It immediately knew that, Farmington was a small public liberal arts school. It identified USM absolutely correctly. It knew that UMaine was the flagship, all of those kind of pieces, the changes at Presque Isle and Fort Kent. So really, really good insights that it was able to pull out from data. And again, if there's anything that we have, it's plenty of data. Presque Isle, again, this is the example that I was talking about. So you can see the number of students in campus housing went from 176 to 190, while the percentage of students in housing was cut in half. Interesting numbers against Presque Isle numbers against system numbers. You can see down at the bottom percentages of in-person. Again, because of your pace, that Presque Isle number is just so small, and same with the housing piece. Fort Kent, again, fairly stable here. You see a recent increase in FY25. Of housing. You see the in-person attendance numbers up at the top. Again, raw numbers fairly stable, but because enrollment has gone down, the percentages change. Again, you can see the mix of on-campus housing and off as well. University of Southern Maine, again, same kind of information. See the rapid increase or the rapid growth, if you will, in campus housing, which makes sense. We brought a new dorm online in the window that we did this analysis, and you can see, incredibly stable in-person numbers, both raw numbers and percentages for the University of Southern Maine. So I'm going to stop there. I was supposed to let the chair add anything he wanted since that was his request. But I'll throw it back to you, Mr. Chair, and happy to answer any questions.
Thanks. Before questions, and thanks for putting this together. I think this is really great information to have, particularly as we look at trends, and keep thinking of the name of our committee, which is Finance, Facilities, and Technology. And we spend a lot of time now increasingly talking about deferred maintenance, which is something the Chancellor has really emphasized since he's been here. Demolition, and we're going to be in a future meeting talking more about the demolition report and the kind of the options that Ryan has laid out for us going ahead with that. And then disposal of excess real estate. All those are really driven by this kind of data, trying to understand what the trends are about how much physical space we have and how much we need and how much we're going to need going forward. So this is really, really helpful stuff. Questions people have about this format of presentation or any of the information that's contained in it? Emily.
Thank you, Ryan. A great presentation. My question is really less about the presentation and more about the data in it. And maybe it's a request, and maybe it's for you, maybe it's for Jeff St. John. But I would wonder if we look back at the 15 years ago time period when things were uncertain, if we should take a look at what the impact was on enrollment from a growth perspective. Sometimes people go back to school when the economy is tough. And I wonder if we might want to try to anticipate some of that as we think about our very broken crystal ball, and maybe take a look at 15 years ago, not by numbers, right? But just from a percentage, a growth or decrease, what were the implications of that as we think about things like housing, and if we can make any sort of guesstimate on online versus in-person, we could maybe glean from that kind of analysis.
Yeah, absolutely. I follow up with Jeff on that one. I think, again, we have lots of data, and we've got tools now that can help us extract that data for a lot of years. And so,
well, I think we also have we have the COVID of it all too in the middle, right? Which, I mean, hopefully we never do that again, but there are probably lessons to be learned there from, what we did well to hold on to a bunch of those students at first, that we may be able to also layer into planning for the next couple of years.
Agreed. Yeah.
Thanks, Emily. Other questions, comments from the assembled group here? Pat?
There we go.
There you go. Yep.
Thank you. The Vice Chancellor spoke quite a bit about the imperfect nature of the numbers or whatever, that, you know, they're hard to get and get precise and different buckets and so forth. I understand that. I appreciate that. But I also wanted to say for a lay person who doesn't deal with this kind of stuff every day, the charts you put together, Roger and Ryan, I thought were really, really helpful to somebody who doesn't deal with this every single day. And it's generalized, I guess. And I think that's exactly what rings for me. So I appreciate it. I think it's good stuff. Thanks.
Excellent. Good feedback.
Thanks, Pat. Other questions or comments? I'm not seeing any, so speak up or we'll move on. Fine, so we'll move ahead. But Ryan, thanks for that. And I know that as you move ahead, those charts are going to get more sophisticated and more helpful to us going ahead. So thank you for doing that.
Yep. So, Mr. Chair, I haven't done the reserve piece. I can do that really quick if as a next item, if you're ready for that.
Sure.
Yep.
You bet.
Okay. So let me share my screen for here. So what you see here is a draft of administrative practice letter around reserves. And so I know you've all been anxiously looking forward to this this conversation. So let me just note a couple of things about this and maybe take us back a little bit. So as I mentioned kind of early in the agenda, we've had lots of conversations in the past about the reserve language as part of the strategic plan. We came back to this sandbox notion and this idea. And one of the things that we knew was if we were gonna formalize this notion of a strategic investment fund and this sandbox piece, that we really needed to clean up the reserve language. It hadn't been, like a lot of our APLs have been in the past, it hadn't been updated in a while, and we knew that. And so this request from the committee really was helpful in that it required us to go back and just redraft the language again. And so what you see here is the new language that we are proposing. So first a process note, and then I'll go through I'll start going through the language. Process-wise, the reserve policy is an administrative practice letter. It's not a board policy, so it doesn't require board approval. But this is obviously language that we work really closely with this committee on. It's how we allocate reserves, and it's what our priorities are, and all of that. So it's obviously one where we're looking for a lot of feedback that we've already got and feedback going forward. So what I talked to the chair about is I'll quickly kind of present the information now. Happy to answer any questions if there are any. And then what I'd like to do is give you, between this meeting and I'll bring it back. Maybe not at the meeting in 2 weeks. That might be a little soon, but at your meeting, whatever your next meeting after this April 30 meeting is, I'll bring it back to you. Any kind of changes that I've heard from the CBOs or from the presidents, and let you see kind of what that final version is, get your feedback, get your sign off, and then I would go through the traditional APL approval process, which is working through the CBOs in this particular example. So if that makes sense process wise, then I'll start diving into the language. Okay, let's see some head nods, so I'll move forward. So I won't go through this line by line, but let me tell you at a high level kind of what the changes are. The first one The first one is the first couple actually, quite frankly, are not as substantive, but they were absolutely needed. And that was really just pulling apart some cleanup, a little bit of cleanup. We had a lot of extra language in there, but most of it was, if you look at the current reserve policy, it is a combination of system and campus policies, and like it literally weaves into individual paragraphs, and a sentence feels like it starts off talking about the system and ends talking about a campus. It's just really confusing language. And so huge thanks to Tracy and some folks on her team, and Miriam and Darla. We have this language that we are proposing for you now that pulls out the system language and the campus level and makes clear distinctions between the two, uses the appropriate terminology depending on which bucket you're in, and then, as I said before, kind of just does some cleanup. There are a couple of substantive changes, and so I do want to talk about those. They're not major, but they're major enough, so I want to highlight them. One is that, and this goes to the point that Chair Riley was mentioning in our conversation, is that we, when the board discussed this, 10 years ago or so, and when the CBOs, quite frankly, were the ones discussing it, we came up with targets for each of these funds, and we didn't really have a great model for higher ed institutions and what the right amount was, but some of us, myself, had been in state government, and we know that the state's budget for its its cap for its budget stabilization fund was 18%. And so for a while, that has been what our goal is. It felt pretty arbitrary, but it made as much sense as 17%, so that's what we went with. But other than UMA, we quite frankly haven't had anyone really approach that benchmark. University of Maine has been higher, but obviously they've just got large budgets, and so the amount to hit 18% for them is a really large number. And then we've got campuses that are in the negative. So we wanted to go back. We wanted to reemphasize those. We've had lots of conversations here and CBOs and with presidents about the importance of reserves and why you need that kind of flexibility in a downtime. And so we think we've got good policy here. Here is the system held buckets, and this is going to be one of the first changes that you're going to see. Skip that highlighted one. You're going to see that we have target balances for all of these, and so the budget stabilization fund, you're going to see right here, has a goal of 10% of our state of Maine general fund E&G appropriation. So before it was tied to a percentage of UMS expenditures, that was the 18% number. And so we decided that this number made sense. It's about $25 million or so. In a perfect world, we'd have a little bit more than that, but certainly as a target, it felt like that made sense for us. And so you're going to see that not just for the budget stabilization fund, but you're going to see it here for the operating fund as well, where it's 15%. And then you'll see it down here in the individual campuses as well, where we've set targets of 20% of their E&G expenses. So it would cover about 10 weeks expenses, about 2.5 months. If you think of the core financial ratios, and we have that 0.4 benchmark, that is equivalent to 2.5 months, I think it is, or something along those lines, maybe a little bit more. But that's what we're shooting for a benchmark for the E&G expenses piece. And you'll see that again in auxiliary. The last change, and this one is not in the version that you have right now. It came out of a couple of conversations since then, and that is this highlighted language. And so we came to you last year with a proposal to use system reserves at the end of the year, and we laid out a plan for you, and we thank you for approving that plan. But And we talk about those kind of investments all the time, but we don't actually come back and say, hey, last year you approved $15 million and here's how we spent it, and it was a great success, or it did not work out well and here's what we learned from that. And so in talking with the chair, I think what we wanted to do was put in some language that would just formalize that. So once a year, maybe at about the same time that Tracy and Darla are doing our year-end financials, we come to you and give you a year-end report on reserve transfers and budget stabilization and other buckets as well. So we spent X amount from the benefit pool reserve. You'll recall it was related to this initiative, and here's how much we have left. So those kind of narratives we would provide. And then we tucked a second version of that down in the campus section where they would just be prepared to report annually. And the idea would be they would provide me that information at the same time, and I'd make it part of the system and campus reports. So that's the reserve language that we're proposing. Again, it's largely reflects current policy. We've tried to make it a little bit clearer, and then in the places where we've made changes, it was really based on good suggestions we got from here. So maybe more realistic targets and some reporting language, and the creation of. If I could share one more piece, I forgot it was my last piece that I was supposed to mention. So if you're seeing this, and if I go back up to the system, here we go, right here. So 2, unified operating reserve is the last piece, if you can see that. This, again, as you can see, supports non-budgeted emergency needs, funds strategic investments that promote system-wide growth, stimulate reform, expand programs benefiting the system as a whole. So again, this is exactly, I realized I didn't share that screen. Trust me, you can see that language in there, but that's the language, number 2, unified operating reserve, that is really meant to be that catch-all for the sandbox, if you will, that the board has talked about. So I'll stop right there and happy to answer questions about that or any other pieces I've covered.
Thanks, Ryan. Questions? Let me start. So Ryan, the targets for dollars in each of these reserves, a couple of them you have switched over from a percentage of overall spending to a percentage of state appropriation. And why is that?
Yeah, because the interesting thing is that you think about how much money you should set aside for, a downturn. And we're in a slightly different role at the system. We're not trying to set aside resources for a system office downturn. And so pegging the percentage to our own expenses felt odd. But at the same time, pegging them to all of the campus budgets didn't feel like it made as much sense either, because again, it's not exclusively a campus tool. And so, having a target of, on a $680 million budget, having a target of 70 million, for instance, felt a little aggressive as well. And so when we started thinking about the system office and our role and the things we do and the support we provide, a lot of it we can tie back to that appropriation piece and our work in the legislature. And so it felt logical. In reality, it could be a raw number just as easily. The target should be 30 million, for instance. That was a number that we felt like made sense, a number that would grow over time, but not unrealistically. For instance, we always have the state controlling it.
Thanks. Okay. David?
Ryan, with the changes in this policy, is there any risk as far as the rating agencies are concerned for the bond rating? So you're setting some specific targets in uncertain times. If we miss them, is that likely to lead to a downgrade? Is there a risk there, and has it been evaluated?
Yeah, well, it's been evaluated in the sense we've had conversations about that. I think on net it's a positive for the rating agencies. You never know, and I'm going to say that right up front. But we've done things like really clarifying what the purpose of the budget stabilization fund is. What they really like to know is that we don't use it as a checking account. And so we've been really clear about what the purpose is. We've been really clear about what the purpose of the operating reserve revenue is. We've taken out lots of various little small accounts, and we've collapsed things. It's not great that we're not at the targets, but quite frankly, we haven't been at those targets for 15 years and it hasn't bit us yet. We're going to put the best spin on it we can. We're going to try to get those reserve balances as high as we can. I think we'll frame these changes as positives for sure.
Ryan, going back to that same point again, the percentage of operating expenses, we're changing it over to a percentage of state appropriation. Is the gross dollar amount which each of those generates about the same at this point in time, or are we decreasing the target in terms of dollars?
Let me think about that. I can't, so maybe Darla or Miriam can help me. The system numbers before was 18%, but I think one of the things we struggled was it, I don't know if it was 18% of the overall system budget. So in that sense, this number would be smaller. But certainly this percentage is more realistic.
Okay.
The idea of 70 million being held at the system, it's a challenge to even wrap my arms around.
Right. Okay. Understood.
It'd be a good problem.
Other questions? Let me ask one other one about the report of transfers made from the reserves each year. We get a report of that at the end of the year, which is terrific. Could you just review from 50,000 feet to what extent the board is under this new policy will be approving, in general terms, the expenditure of those transfers at the beginning of the fiscal year? Does that question
Correct.
make sense?
Yep. So you'll be very involved. One, typically the things that would, I'm trying to think of, so you would be involved in the sense that anything that is going to move related to budget, you're obviously going to approve that piece. But there are certainly things that come along during the course of the fiscal year that aren't planned, that we do need to use resources for, that we do engage the board with. So you're always involved in the conversations, but I think the report will be a good reminder. And so, let me give you an example. Legal settlements. We had 2 of them this year. I don't know how much we've talked about those in public, and so I won't say the specifics of them. But we had 2 legal settlements. We used the operating reserve for that. In both of those cases, that was obviously not a budgeted item, but in both of those cases, we did do various updates within all of the legal requirements that we have to the board about those items. And so the board in those 2 cases was very aware we were doing that, even though it wasn't in the budget. So you're involved in all of them. Sometimes it's through the budget approval process. Sometimes it's through actions right here. Sometimes where it's appropriate, it's updates in executive session and then follow up after. But you're in that loop everywhere. And I think what this report will do, it'll tie it all together nicely and show you, how you were involved in each bucket.
Yeah, perhaps we can give that a little bit more thought. And it's getting, again, I don't think about this administration. I think about the next administration, which may have different people associated with it. And maybe some language which mandates the reporting of these kind of off-budgeted things during the course of the year, like legal settlements. I mean, you do give us updates on those, and thank you for doing so, and it's appropriate, and we should get them. But I'm not sure there's anything in the policy which requires it, and maybe we want to think of some language that would require it.
Yeah. I'll talk to our team, and we'll work on that and come back with some suggestions.
Great. Thanks. Other questions or comments? I'm not seeing any, so thanks, Ryan. Why don't you move ahead then?
Okay, I think, if I'm right, are we at the main center in the agenda? I lost the screen when my battery died.
Yeah, I mean, to the extent that this is a work session on the overall budget, and you know, perhaps I don't mean to spring this on you. Is there some sort of high level discussion you can give us on what changes may have been made to the 26 budget as a result of our previous sessions, or adjustments that have been made, or maybe that's a campus by campus thing?
Changes since the March meeting?
Yeah.
Miriam, are you aware of any big ones? I don't think we've made many. To the extent that we've had to adjust anything, it's only, you know, correcting an error or something along those lines.
Okay.
I don't think we've done anything substantive, either because we needed to or we were responding to something you asked for. So Miriam, correct me if I'm wrong. Yeah.
No, that's correct. We haven't. The campuses have made some minor adjustments. Maybe they had a vacant position, for example, that they decided to eliminate. I can think of that one. But yeah, for the most part, it's just been some cleanup within general accounts, so nothing major.
Yeah. And when I do my presentation, Mr. Chair, on the 30th, that can be, I'll do the full budget presentation, so that can be, I'll add that in, you know, here's to the extent there are any changes.
Good, thank you. I didn't mean to spring that on you here, but I assumed there weren't any major ones, but good, that's good to know. Anything else, any other questions about the budget as a whole, even though we'll be revisiting it on the 30th, while we're here today? Does anyone have any other questions today? I'm not seeing any, so if not, then we'll conclude the discussion on this part of this and then move on to the main center discussion. So thank you, Ryan. Go ahead.
Yeah. So thank you. And so excited to move on to this next piece. I think we've got a few folks lined up here. So the request, just as a reminder, you know, we provide some level, you provide some level of E&G support to the main center that has evolved over a few budget cycles. We, as I mentioned earlier in the presentation, we initially provided $400,000 annually out of the E&G budget for CEO services. I came to you last year with the chancellor, and we made the argument for essentially consolidating all of the building expenses between the two buildings in Portland under the main center. Felt like that was important. So that represents the full $2 million of kind of E&G investments in your system budget. There are obviously that's a much larger program down there, and lots of moving parts with campuses and CES team and so on. I think the chair had simply asked for kind of an update and where things stood now, and then how are we seeing the future in maybe a post Alfond world, and how are we handling you know, the potential for all of those liabilities in the future, and what kind of planning are we doing? And so I'm excited to talk about that. So I'm going to throw this over to the chancellor. Chancellor will kind of tee this up a little bit. I think Seth's going to talk a little bit about the good work that he's doing. We'll have President Farini-Mundi talk about some of the out year items as well. And so with that, let me throw it to the chancellor.
Great, thank you very much. I would also point out that Carolyn Dorsey, who is co-PI, is also on the screen, and she should feel free to contribute should she wish to do that. I'm certainly happy to be joined by Joan Farini-Mundi and Seth Goodall in this presentation. My role is relatively small, but can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. So Rowena told me she couldn't hear me, but that might be because the door's closed. So I want to get back on point. The main center itself, as we refer to it, is one of the four pillars of the Harold Alfond Foundation the funding that they made. You might remember that now stands at $320 million, which is amended up from the original $240 million that was originally allocated. We ended up getting a lot more money than we had anticipated. I've shared this with some of you in the past. I'll share it again. When I joined as chancellor and before my actual term began, I had the opportunity to spend time with the Alfond Foundation folks and with my predecessor. Ultimately, I thought that our requests were not big enough, and that we couldn't get more if we didn't ask for more. And ultimately, we asked for $500 million, and we ended up with the amended number that I've mentioned, 320, which also runs with an expectation that we raise money against that. So we actually do end up with $500 million in investments, but clearly a portion of those monies are monies that we can receive from the federal government, from the state government, from fundraising as well. So we continue to work at that. We've had some success, some very great success in some areas that are a little bit slower to get off to get to target, but we're working hard on that, and we'll continue to work on that as well. With respect to the main center, the Alfond monies were allocated $55 million, $15 million for programmatic increases, and $40 million for capital and space. Expected to have a major impact on the operations of the center, and the center largely consists of, on an academic basis, largely consists of the law school and our MBA program in the state. So if you're trying to have your primary mission of the space that we're talking about in the ground, it's those two areas. But there are other areas, including the introduction of additional engineering possibilities at the center physical structure itself as well. The center is in the middle of the business district. The buildings they are, and you would know those if you're familiar with Portland, is the space at 304th Street, the first lease / right to own and buy was at 304th Street. The second building is 7 Custom House as well. Again, both of those buildings can be accessed from either one of those buildings, but not right now at the stage that we would like it to be. There needs to be renovations in both portions of those buildings. I would also say to you that we have agreements in place that we have the right to move on to not only own the buildings, but to own all of the land. Seth might address that to some greater extent with specific dates and the like. It certainly appears to be our intention, having spent a fair amount of money on the initial renovations, largely around the law school, that we would exercise those options, and those options continue to be supported by the Alfond Foundation. I think that's a quick background, but certainly happy to take questions as we go along. I don't know whether Seth and or Joan flipped a coin, so I'm not sure who I'm supposed to kick it to first. I'll let the two of you fight it out.
Well, I don't ever want to be in a public fight with Seth, so I'll just start, and then he can say all the things that we missed, Chancellor. But thank you. It's a great overview. Can you all hear me okay? One last point that I would mention is the award period of the grant. So it's a 2021 through 2033 award with cash flow laid out by the Alfond Foundation over that entire period. And so really it's fiscal 34 that is our overall project end date. And I think that's important to keep in mind. We've been very energetic across the entire project about trying to jump in right at the beginning. And I think that's important. But these funds do extend out over a period of time. And in terms of the management and organization of the award, the co-PIs, as Chancellor mentioned, that's Carolyn Dorsey and me. And then there's a project director, Grace Garland, and project financial lead is Jenny Boyden. And I think Jenny's on the call and maybe Grace too. So we meet weekly to discuss all things about this project. And those include modeling the out-year costs, looking at an all-funds approach that has us taking a look also at when the match is coming in, what the university and Humane System E&G shares are like, and so forth. And we spent a lot of time preparing the reporting for the Alfond Foundation, which is extremely helpful. I just wanted to focus on one very specific piece of this, and then Seth will have more to say if you're interested in bigger picture things. But a part of the project includes bringing on faculty and other staff to actually do the work, to get things launched at the beginning. And some of that is directly supported in the grant. Some of it, the universities are actually providing the time and effort of some of our faculty and administrators to be a part of this. But there were 6 positions that were included in the original award, essentially 2 in business, 2 in public policy, and 2 in law. And the idea is that the Alfond dollars, per our agreement, support those positions for the first 3 years. And then each university / the law school need to be prepared to take those positions onto core, onto base E&G funding, or whatever funding they might be planning for in the 4th year. And so that will hit largely in 2028 for those 6 positions. They're in various stages of being brought on board and being hired and assigned to lead some of the programmatic work within the center. And so all of us, the 3, Jackie Edmondson and Lee Softly and I, all have looked at our own budget planning, our long-term planning, and agreed that those positions will come back onto the campus at that time. So I know that piece has been of concern, and I assure you that we not only look at those positions and when they would need to have more secure longer term funding, and we're very grateful to the Alfond Foundation for letting us start the project this way with some external personnel funds. But at the same time, we are looking at the programs of the work, and they're all in different places in terms of what it looks like over this period of time to 2031, and then also, I'm sorry, to 2034. And then at the same time, thinking about those programs, and many of them can sunset at that time if they have done what we agreed to do in the project. Others of them over that period, we may decide need to be continued or varied or adapted into some new form. And at those times, we would face those decisions. But there's sufficient funding, of course, in this generous award to do the programmatic work that we've already outlined. Seth, I'm sure I'm missing things, so I'll turn it to you.
Thank you, President Brini-Mundy, and as well as Chancellor, and of course, the presidents, and a special thank you to Grace Garland and her team, especially with her bringing on Jenny Boyden. I want to talk just a little bit about the numbers and the governance following off of what Vice Chancellor Lowe was speaking about at large earlier, because in a similar model, we're really bringing the financial rigor to the Maine Center. And I want to start by just thanking the trustees last year for giving us those additional budget allocations, the approval of the strategic building funds that the Chancellor and Chancellor Lowe proposed. And what we've been able to do is truly have a unified budget for all of the building expenses. And at the time, we did say that was a transition year, FY25. So we're well positioned going into FY26. And a special thank you to Miriam White, as well as Nicole Vinyl and my team, Heather York, for really working on that budget amongst support from others. In addition to that, working very closely now moving forward with Jenny Boyden in terms of, okay, how do we properly forecast? And we do have, in essence, 3 and 5 year pro forma projections for the real estate, also looking at the incoming revenue, as well as each representative share for the underlying universities. And not only are we meeting with leadership, as President Brini-Mundy spoke about, we're also meeting internally monthly to make sure that we're hitting our marks and also revising. So obviously this is the FFT budget workshop, and I just really wanted to stress those points. Number 2, as it relates to the building construction renovation project, We've heard the chancellor talk about in the past, as well as other presidents, not only the value that these buildings bring, but also the importance they are to help elevating the programming. And I really just want to highlight and congratulate the University of Maine School of Law with their recent ranking improvement to 88. And I can just see the vitality, the energy, and the interest and new students, alumni, and the general legal community, amongst others, in the building. And that's just for the law school. Once we bring the entire building online, that will only rise further for all the programs that are engaged, as well as the system and the state at large. As it relates to the building, we are taking a very conservative, measured approach to its renovations. One, we are saying, okay, how can we bring on board all of the space in 7 Custom House, hopefully in phase 1 for the dollars that were approved for 8.5 million. Phase 2 would be more improvements to the building as well as the envelope. And then phase 3, as we have the dollars available, you look at the final step of interconnecting them, which meets and aligns with the underlying intent of the Alpha grant, as well as with the goal and vision of leadership. So it's a measured, thoughtful, very financially prudent approach. And I'd be remiss if I didn't thank, of course, the leadership of the Maine congressional delegation for their support and ultimately securing, under Senator Collins' leadership, the $2.4 million for this, the first phase of improvements, along with $6 million out of the capital improvement funds that were approved and championed by the governor and the state legislature. So we're also looking at, of course, revenue in the future years as it comes from our commercial tenants. I just want to really highlight those aspects. And then, of course, I can talk about more programming and so forth, but we've talked about that at length in prior board trustees updates. But I just really wanted to highlight some of the processes that we have in place. And lastly, we went over in great detail with Chair Cates, as well as Trustee Riley, in their regular monthly update, or excuse me, Friday update with Chancellor Lowe and Vice Chancellor Lowe and Chancellor Malloy. So happy to answer any questions, and I'll leave it at that.
Seth, just 1 second. I do want to, a great presentation. I do want to point out that in the negotiations as to what counted as a match, we took the position that state dollars and federal dollars flowing directly from those entities should be counted. And in fact, they do apply to our match requirement. So we are moving steadily, perhaps slower than I'd like, but steadily towards raising the monies necessary for us to control all the funds allocated.
Thank you. So thank you all three for that presentation. It may generate some questions from the group. Do we have any? Yes, Trish. You're on mute, Trish.
Sorry. Thank you. That was a very good presentation. I think it's important to know the long view here. And I know we've done a good job on match, but I just wanted a quick risk assessment, given what we know, the risks to our state funding and federal funding, given the tariffs for all the renovation. How are we sort of weighing the risk assessment about those potential implications that could affect both our match and the cost of the project?
Me start, unless I.
But let me start with that, and then turn it back to you, Seth, if that's okay. I think the build out or the repair and build out of the 2 buildings is staged specifically and thought of specifically, taking the issues that you just raised, Trustee, into account. And we are mindful that although it would be great to be able to do everything at once, it's probably not practical given the circumstances in the economy, the tariff threat, which I think is raising prices. So we, I think, are trying to find the right way to move forward. On the other hand, we have these monies allocated by the state and federal government, and we're anxious to do that which we can. We should also point out, and I probably left this out and should have visited it, Again, we are currently leasing these buildings subject to an overall agreement that allows us to buy these buildings, including the land under what we all call the 304th Street or the law school. So all of that comes together over time, and obviously we're going to need to be in a position to fund that, but we are making some progress. I don't think anything we do right now on our campuses or as a university system is thought of without thinking about the implications of what's going on the tariff side and what's going on with respect to punishments that may be given out or threatened, or the need to, in some cases, change our own dialogue. So we spend most of our day, I think, right now, trying to wrestle with those issues, and I think we can celebrate some successes that we've had already, but I also think we have to worry about the challenges that lay before us. Seth, do you have anything?
Thank you, Chancellor. Very specifically, Trustee, one, we are building in a contingency in our forecast, including in phase one, for tariffs. Two, as it relates to the congressional directed spending, thanks to the leadership of the University of Maine, we received those dollars last fall. So that is positive. And of course, we all know the status of the capital improvement funds, thanks to the leadership and generosity of the state government. In addition to that, we also are taking, going back to my earlier remarks, a very conservative approach to what we focus on and how much we attempt to accomplish, because we want to make sure we obviously have all of the cash available before we even really start planning any building project. So yes, we have taken steps and finalized a concept draft, in essence, a master plan for the building. But we only move into technical drawings and start spending money once we have those dollars secured. So I just want to kind of really reiterate that point. And then, of course, you heard President Freddie Monday talking about the very measured approach and forecasting approach as it relates to the faculty positions that are coming on board.
Let me also point out one other thing, Seth, and that is when we own these buildings, presuming we do own these buildings, our income goes up substantially because of the rental properties that are associated with the lowest level of the second building.
And one thing we just haven't spoken about in this conversation, but I know it's come up in the past. The cost of developing these buildings and the value for the underlying universities that participate and are based out of the Maine Center buildings, the state, as well as the system, is significantly less than it would cost to build from a new construction standpoint. And in addition to that, one thing I should have mentioned, we are hopefully positioned well if tariff dues go into place, because the amount of steel and other materials is quite limited as in comparison to a new construction project. So I really wanted to emphasize those 2 points.
Could I jump in, please, just for a second here?
Please.
Thank you. So $20 million of the match that is required for this must be in the program area.
Yeah.
And so we've been talking about the building and the tariffs, and that all does make sense. Although I will say that even for current congressionally directed spending, we need to be very attentive to moves that the federal government is making at this time that have to do with F&A. So that's a kind of a separate matter. But I think that in the 20 million match that we need to find for the 25 million programmatic components of this, as the chancellor has mentioned, in our agreement with the Alphons, we were able to negotiate the idea that match could come from our traditional donor base. It could come from federal dollars. It could come from state dollars. It can even come from some system special investment. But I think we will be very likely to have to face challenges on the federal side of the match programmatically. So we're starting to look at that now, but that's a part of a much bigger assessment. And that could possibly apply to state as well. So stay tuned, but it's a great question.
But we also, the match is also through the 34. We have that full-time match.
Yep.
Yeah, so.
Roger, I'm not sure if you can see I have my hand
Yeah,
raised.
yeah, Emily, please go ahead.
Okay, awesome. Thanks. My question is, all this makes sense to me. It's cool space. I've been there. I'm very clear on all of that. My question is about the fundraising side. I know there's a philanthropy component to this. Can you talk about where we are with the philanthropy goal for the main center?
So,
Yes.
okay, somebody else. I was going to start.
Anyone, all of you. I don't care. You choose your own answer.
But Joan, you'll go first.
Yeah, I'll just say that, Emily, Trustee Kane, what we've been trying to do is really push on fundraising at a global level for the entire project, for the full required $188 million. And we're doing pretty well on that. And we're now at the phase where we need to be looking within each of these required expectations by, it's really not even just by the 4 pieces, it's within those 4 pieces. There are some numbers that we're targeting. And so Seth can say more, but we're pretty early on in that piece. We had a very strong effort at the very beginning to focus on the federal potential match.
I remember when I
Very
first
good.
came on the board attending a Zoom with a smaller committee with the University of Maine Foundation and stakeholders. This is even before we even got into
Yes.
the forestry building, which, because when I think at the time we thought we were gonna have to build something, I was part of and agreed that this was a better idea to move into an existing space. But I assume philanthropy is still a big part of how
It's
plan.
going to be a bigger part going forward, to tell the truth.
Yeah.
And one place where we are having success, and we're very grateful to our generous donors, is on scholarships that are specifically tied to programs that are that are a part of the center. So in business and in law particularly, we're starting to see some progress there, but that is kind of underway. But Seth may have more details on the building side.
Yeah, thank you, President. Tactically, I'll start there, and as well as in terms of the amount. You heard President Free-Monday, as well as the Chancellor reference the match requirements. So as it relates to the building, using round numbers, we have approximately $9 million more to raise. And that is neatly aligned by chance with additional dollars, the 8.5 that will put the buildings in really good shape. That'll help fund Trustee Kane, the future phases of construction. Number 2, what we are doing is in collaboration with the foundations of UMaine, USM, and Maine Law, we are meeting regularly. We are building not only our case statements, but all of our materials and prospects lists, and specifically leveraging that a successful exercise in collaboration that you spoke to earlier about to help fund the move into 304th Street. We are also not only limiting what I would refer to as traditional fundraisings, but especially as it relates to naming opportunities and spaces, what have you, but also the great work of the underlying foundations as it relates to scholarships and just bringing greater awareness. But really the core and the key objective is collaboration, because this is a unique project. The Maine Center does not have, nor does it intend ever to build out a foundation. We are leveraging the expertise in that partnership across those respective foundations.
Thank you.
Other questions? A couple. Seth, just going back to that last point you were mentioning about the additional renovations. Am I correct that there's, I know we've approved the $8.5 million already, that we understand the sources those came from. Are you saying that there's another $9 million to finish those renovations in round numbers? And at this point, we're uncertain about the source of those dollars, but it's probably going to be private fundraising. Did I hear that right?
To add some additional context and clarify, Mr. Chair, one, we have, using round numbers, $9 million additional required to raise for the facility under the Harold Alfond Maine Center component of UMS Transforms. And when you add that $9 million on top of the 8.5, knowing that's going to fund future phases of construction, that will put the building in a very good position. It won't accomplish everything that we have laid out in that concept plan, but it will really create a really dynamic, a wonderful place. That being said, just to make sure I clarify, once we complete the renovations related to your approval of 8.5 million, we will have nearly the entire building renovated. However, the master plan of interconnection, as well as exterior improvements will not be completed. But we will have the building nearly 100% open, knowing that some of that space, to what the chancellor pointed out earlier, does generate revenue through commercial tenants.
Okay, so the interconnectivity and the exterior stuff is about 9 million.
The 9 million will help pay for, as we currently have it phased to be finalized, additional exterior improvements, as well as some other mechanical and just improvements that the building needs. So 8.5 to open up the spaces at 7 Custom House Street, an additional 9 plus for finishing the building as it relates to exterior improvements, interconnections, the grand entry, and other mechanical needs. And I'm
Great,
saying
thanks a
that
lot.
big disclaimer.
Thank you. And maybe this is for President Farini Monday, but I understand the 6 positions we're going to have to plan for. The other programming aspects of the Alphon grant end in 34 and in fiscal 34. So we need to be obviously starting to think about those, but do they all kind of end at once, or are they phased out? So we're going to have to be thinking about raising some additional dollars in 30, 31, 32, et cetera? Or is it just to fall off the cliff, so to speak, in 34?
Well, they phase out, but they are of different types, and we're still sort of early on. So, for example, we have a scholarship program with the Alphon ambassadors that we never had before, and it may be something that we choose to keep going. It may be something where we work with our foundations to try to keep that going in a different way. But we need to evaluate everything that we're doing too. It would be unusual on the programmatic side to do work for 10 or 12 years without some interim stock taking to say, what is this getting us? How can we tweak it? How can we change it? So that's a long-winded way of saying it's a little too soon to tell, but as with any outside grant, very often the programming happens within the period of the grant and then is concluded. And the university either decides to find some way to keep it going or has done what they were obliged to do. All of the programmatic side, I think, fits in that category. And we'll, as attention turns in more depth and more complexity to all of that, we'll have better answers for you. But right now, it depends, I guess, is the answer.
Okay, thank you. Thanks very much.
I'm sorry if I could just quickly.
Yes, please.
We should point out that the law school is substantially stepping up its fundraising activities as well, and very appreciative of the leadership of Lee Softly in that regard, including bringing on staff for such purpose. She has booked me for a lot of Thursday lunches, I understand, throughout the summer.
Thank you. And you can talk about your undefeated record as a prosecutor in Connecticut, as I recall.
No, actually, those cases were all done in Brooklyn, New York.
Oh, okay.
Mr. Chair, if I
yes.
may, I forgot one critical point. It's really the engagement with not only FFFT, of course, but also the Board of Trustees. This is a very unique project. We will be back in front of the FFT and the Board of Trustees for those phases, as well as updates. You heard me outline, of course, 8.5, the additional $9 million that we have to raise under the Harold Alphon grant. But in addition to that, there will be costs for future renovations that do exceed, that total amount. So I just want to caution everybody that the total project cost will exceed that, but we still have, many years to complete that, because we do know that this is a multi-phase project.
Thank you. And thanks for leading us through the complexity, because it is complex and sometimes difficult to get our arms around the whole thing. So this has been really helpful. Any further questions? I'm seeing none, so thanks again, and particularly Seth, thanks for joining us. And we can move on now. We're almost on schedule to materials at tab 3 in our materials, energy procurement overview. And Gretchen's with us, who's a Chief Facilities and General Services Officer. Gretchen, good morning.
Good morning, everyone. I will start by sharing my screen. All right. And I recognize that I am the barrier between many of you and lunch, so I will try to make this as engaging as possible. So to begin, I want to start by recognizing the exceptional work of our strategic procurement team, which is led by Rachel Piper, not only for securing strong energy contracts that protect UMS from market volatility, but also for effectively managing our vendor relationship with CES. Their leadership has ensured that we continue to benefit from expert guidance and long-term value. All right. So the University of Maine system employs a comprehensive approach to energy procurement that balances cost stability with market opportunities. This helps protect us from price volatility while also taking advantage of favorable markets. In 2019, UMS leveraged state policy, specifically LD 1711, which expanded net energy billing in Maine and joined a multi-institutional consortium managed by CES. The structure has enabled us to access favorable pricing and mitigate risks throughout aggregated purchasing power without relying on traditional piggyback or state contracts. And this consortium does include Maine Community College System and other major institutions in Maine. All right. So the university employs two distinct strategies for electricity procurement. The first is a more dynamic approach called the ratchet approach. With this approach, we set a baseline with a 5% ceiling and closely monitor the market quotes. And when I say closely monitor, I mean CES, our partner, helps monitor that, the markets. If the markets move down, we lower our price threshold to capture those downward movements. But if the markets start to move up, we lock in the price to protect against significant increases. As an example, in December of 2024, UMaine locked in 50% of their open positions as the market was starting to rise. This strategy allows us to take advantage of downward price trends while also guarding against major price spikes. Hedging is another approach that we use. This is a more conservative strategy, but provides greater budget certainty and reduces administrative complexity as well. So with this approach, we purchase electricity in scheduled tranches over time. We secure fixed pricing contracts for predetermined periods and spread that purchase to average the price out over the exposure. Moving on. So there are factors that influence the price of energy, and those include the natural gas market, electricity market trends, and transmission and distribution rate changes that we previously talked about in another FFT meeting. These interconnected factors create a complex energy market landscape that requires sophisticated procurement and strategies to navigate them effectively. So why do campuses experience different rate increases? There's variations in the rates, and that largely depends on the different energy sources that the campuses use, as well as utility service territories that impact that. As we talked about on the previous slide, the transmission rates are different depending on where we are located. So for example, CMP, Versant Power, and Versant Maine Public District territories. And then the procurement timing is also a factor. Energy contracts are secured at different times for each campus, and that can impact the rate increases that they have over time. These result in the varying impacts, with campuses sometimes seeing decreases while others may experience an increase in their energy costs. Net energy billing is another way that we use for a cost reduction strategy across the University of Maine system, in addition to the traditional procurement strategies. So through sustainable projects such as the hydro and solar partnerships, UMS receives energy bill credits as well as renewable energy credits. Since joining the net energy billing program, UMS has saved over $8.2 million system-wide, with an additional $1.5 million in renewable energy credits since 2021. CES has helped us aggregate the campus demand and secure project shares, ensuring that even our smaller campuses benefit from this renewable energy strategy. So the net energy billing program supports cost savings as well as carbon reduction, and it's an essential part of our strategy for sustainability. So the budget impacts and financial planning. UMS, through our partnership with CES, tracks and forecasts energy costs to support financial planning, and with the FY26 budget reflects our current procurement strategies and market conditions. These figures represent the varying procurement strategies, energy sources, and utility territories affecting each campus. These figures vary as we can see across the board. So in addition, we want to think about how does all of this impact our overall energy costs across each campus? So energy prices times the energy usage actually equals the energy costs for each campus. And there are factors that impact those costs for each campus. For example, a 24/7 operation for labs, research, steam plants can impact that. Campus missions also drive this. So for example, a research-intensive institution like the University of Maine will experience much higher energy usage than your traditional commuter college. And then usage, winter heating loads, summer cooling, drive those as well. So a positive story for you here. We have been actively engaging in projects across the system, and UMF is a great example of this with their ESCO project to further improve energy efficiencies. This actually helped them address deferred maintenance. It improved their net asset value by 2%, and they have seen a 42% reduction in annual utility expenses. So future considerations and policy impacts are important. These strategies account for policy changes, market developments affecting costs and opportunities. With the support of CES, we're monitoring these factors while maintaining a multifaceted procurement strategy by combining fixed priced contracts, dynamic ratchet strategies, renewable energy programs. We've created a resilient approach for the University of Maine system as it pertains to cost stability and saving opportunities. So to close out, we're really powering campuses efficiently, taking both a strategic approach and a stewardship approach, and these are the key takeaways. With that, I'll stop sharing, and I'm happy to entertain any questions people may have.
And thank you very much. And thanks for the overview. David.
Thanks, Gretchen. The one thing that struck me as I read this was the magnitude of the savings from fiscal 24 to fiscal 25. And maybe I'm just getting senile, but I hadn't realized that previously, that we've been saved almost $5 million year on year. So I think everybody involved needs to be congratulated. I also, my question is around partnerships. You did mention that with the net energy billing, we were with the community college system. Are we cooperating with the state of Maine and whoever else can bring load to the table to allow us to get the best possible prices, as well as the community college system?
So we're not partnering directly with the state, but we did benefit from the state's legislative action through that consortium. So with that, there are many institutions throughout the state that help us aggregate those savings across the board. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, is there more we can do to get better savings? or are we maximizing that?
I think we're maximizing our value right now. We have a great partnership with CES, but if anybody else has any other suggestions, we're definitely open to hearing it.
Gretchen, could you just remind us again what CES is?
So CES is a vendor that we partner with. They're part of they're overseeing the consortium. They actually monitor the energy markets and help us manage those contracts that we have for purchasing energy. So they help, they're really the experts in that area, and we rely on their expertise to maximize value for the university.
Thanks. Thank you. Other questions for Gretchen?
Roger, I think CES,
David.
Rich Siltman, correct?
Oh, okay. Familiar name.
Yeah,
For those of us of a certain age.
there are
Great,
some
okay.
UMaine grads that help develop it.
Great. Thank you. Any other questions? Seeing none, Gretchen, thanks so much. There was one inaccuracy in what you said, and that was that you were standing between us and lunch. There is one more thing.
Okay.
Unless there are other issues to come up, which I'm missing, we were going to go into executive session, hopefully relatively briefly. Ryan or anyone else, anything else to come up before we do that?
I don't think so, Mr. Chair. I think we're ready.
Okay, so we'll go into executive session, and just for those of you who are watching, when we come out, we won't be doing anything further, so we'll be essentially ending the meeting at that point. So could I please have a motion for the Finance, Facilities, and Technology Committee of the Board of Trustees to go into executive session under the provisions of 1 MRSA Section 405 6C to discuss the condition, acquisition, or disposition of real property or economic development, or if premature disclosure of the information would prejudice the competitive or bargaining position of the system. Is there such a motion?
I'll move.
Second.
Moved by Trustee Kane and seconded by Trustee Michaud. Could you take the roll call vote, please?
Trustee Cates,
Yes.
Trustee Riley,
Yes.
Trustee McMahon,
Yes.
Trustee Kane,
Yes.
Trustee Flood,
Yes.
Trustee Michaud,
Yes.
Trustee McCarthy.
Yes.
The motion carries. I'll move you into executive session.
Just one other thing real quick. I just want to thank everybody, particularly for Ryan and his team for putting together today's presentations, and which enabled us to go through this in such a businesslike and prompt way. So thank you very much, and thanks for the presence in this call of all the presidents and other administration who work so hard every day. So thank you. Okay, good. Yep. Thanks, Beth. Beth, you're going to transfer us over?
Yes, we're transferring you over.
Thanks.
I got dropped.
Okay, we are back, and I don't know if there's any members of the public still here, but if you are, thank you for your patience, but we have no further business to conduct, and I will adjourn this meeting and see you all soon.
Thanks.